Here we go. Hi, everyone. We'll see as everyone starts to come in. I love to watch the names coming in. It's really fun. So it's Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And what we were going to talk tonight about the flu. But I don't want to start right into that because I know that you're just starting to come in and I can see some names just starting to pop in. So I'm going to sip my tea, and I hope you have some tea or coffee or a nice beverage to drink while we talk for a few minutes. I think this will last probably, it usually does last about 30 minutes. So every time I drink, not every time I drink tea, but I just made this tea tonight. And it was a consolidation of a lot of different teas that I just happened to have around and wanted to get rid of. I just didn't want them to go stale. So I started to mix them all together. And it reminded me, excuse me, of a story that happened, something that happened when about 25 years ago, when my mother, who was always in organizational mode, went through the kitchen and was gathering up all the different teas and just threw them all together, made a big pot of water, and just put all the teas in together and said, oh, well, whatever it is, it is. She added some honey to it and made a couple of good jars of it and for iced tea and put it in the refrigerator. Now, my father, who was a professional musician playing in orchestras around Buffalo, New York, played flute. And he said, look at this, iced tea. So he drank a glass and he enjoyed it. So he drank a second glass. And then he drank a third glass, I think it was in the morning. And that night he had a performance. And he was up on the stage with all of the other musicians. And it was his turn to play. It was his part. And he had his flute and he was playing. And all of a sudden he went, oh my God. And he realized something was really wrong. And it turned out that my mother had made tea with Smooth Move. There was senna in it. And it started to act on him. At the very moment he was playing his part in this orchestra. I think it was Amherst, New York. And so he had to actually leave the stage and exit as quickly as he could to the men's room. So every time I think about consolidating teas, I think of my parents. I think of my mother and her haphazard way of making things, and my father who got suckered into drinking 3 glasses of it in the morning. When he got home, he said, "What the did you put in it?" "Oh," she said, "it must have been Smooth Move." I'm sure it was. My husband's sitting next to me laughing because every time we think of that story, his eyes went, "Holy cow!" Oh, God, I miss him. My father passed away this past September, and I miss him terribly. So I like to think of the happy stories and the funny stories. My father was a great jokester. He was a very funny man. So tonight we're going to talk about the flu. We've done this once already, but boy, are we getting a response, and people are asking more questions, and I don't blame them because I would love to say it's as simple as this remedy is for the flu and that's the end of it, but it's not as cookie cutter like as we might hope. So, and that's because we don't know what flu it is. You know, sometimes certain flus act certain ways in populations, and other flus the next year act in a completely different way. So we don't know exactly what we're looking at. The flu of 1918, I think I've talked about this recently. I do so many events now, I don't remember who I told and when. But so bear with me if you've heard this already. But in 1918, epidemicus that was the genus epidemicus, which means it was the remedy that worked for an entire population, actually pretty much across the earth, was gelsemium. And it was learned later that, you know, of course, 1918, there was very little communication. There certainly were no phones readily available, or even, well, there were telegraphs, I suppose, at that time. So the doctors that were, and homeopaths back in that time in the U.S. were all MDs. So the doctors who were using homeopathy in Chicago, and those who were using it in New York, and those who were using it in Philadelphia, and those who were using homeopathy in North Carolina, didn't know what each other were using, and they all came to the same consideration. They came to the same remedy. Wait, I'm not adding one other aspect to this. The doctors in London, the doctors in Paris, the doctors in Madrid were all uniformly across the board, were all using gelsemium. Some were using it in a 30, some were using it in a 200, and my guess is some of them may have used it in a 6 or even a 1 amp. But the point is that they were all using the same medicine without knowing from each other what everyone else was using. So that gelsemium was certainly the remedy that was of choice across the earth. Now, how did we find out that they were all doing that? Well, that was, as I said, it was the flu of 1918, 1919, and that, by the way, parenthetically, that flu was taking down young people. It was not killing, and it was a very high mortality rate to that flu, and it wasn't necessarily the young children or the elderly or even the middle-aged. It was the young 25-year-olds, the 18-year-old, the 30-year-olds, the younger people who were in their prime, and they would go to work in the morning, and that night they'd come home feeling very sick, and sometimes even they were saying that they were even dying within a day or so. It was very dramatic, and there were the numbers were extremely high. And the homeopaths, however, found that gelsemium worked so well that I wish I had my numbers in front of me. I should have looked it up. I was inadvertent in even bringing this up tonight. Is kind of off the cuff, but I believe the numbers were that the mortality rate of the homeopaths was something like less than 1%, while the allopaths had very high mortality rates. Now, the allopaths were telling people to take aspirin, and that is exactly the opposite of what should be done during the flu. It's a very dangerous practice to use aspirin, and of course, people don't talk about aspirin so much anymore, other than they're using it now for cardiac prevention of cardiac diseases, or so they say. So across the board, it was gelsemium, and we can see that after a while that there is a specific medicine that is the genus epidemicus, great term, that will allow us to use one homeopathic medicine pretty much for the largest number of people in a very large population. So tonight we're going to talk about a couple of different ways to approach the flu. Interestingly, when I wrote about the flu a couple of weeks ago, I think, or maybe a month or so ago, there was a doctor who came in. I think his name is Dr. Christopher. He responds to my blog every once in a while. He's a homeopath and an MD. And he, I think, has a practice where he sees a lot of acutes. So that's very valuable, because when you see numbers, that's what I talk about with the Banerjees. They see numbers, great numbers of people. When you see a great number of people, clinically, you start getting kind of a rhythm as to what medicines are acting. Now, I've been talking about aconitum and gelsemium, I believe, at that time, because that's really great for a cough, especially if you don't know if it's actually the flu. It could be a cough or a cold, so it's those two mixed together, aconitum 200 with gelsemium 30. I've also used a gelsemium 200 too, by the way. And there's kind of a little story that goes behind that with the Banerjees when I learned that from them, because I had seen them in their clinic using gelsemium 200 with aconitum 200, and then later on I learned that that must have been perhaps an anomaly that I recorded and wrote down. It still works, but they more often use gelsemium in a 30 with aconitum 200. And that's given every few hours, depending on the severity of the illness. And of course, you always, when it's an acute, you're always backing off. You start with, say, every 3 hours if it's extreme, and then go to every 6 hours, perhaps, as the person starts to improve. If they're not improving yet, then you can stay with that every 3 hours. So I'm looking here at some of my notes, and one of the other remedies that I like to use for the flu, especially if there are aching bone joints or bones and joints ache and muscle joints, etc., is rhus tox. Rhus tox, especially in a 30, and then sometimes we use that with bryonia because bryonia is better, is very good for when there's pain from movement, and that's used approximately every 3 hours. Now that's something I'm looking right now at the Banerjee protocol book, and that is one of their main first remedies. But getting back to Dr. Christopher, someone who uses homeopathic medicines regularly for acutes, I want you to in my blog, when he commented on that, I said, heads up, everyone, take note. I don't see a lot of acutes. I work with mostly chronic conditions. I do see, I certainly talk to people who have the flu, but it's not the same if a doctor is seeing them coming in and going out with all day long with flu. He said, and I tend to agree with him because I've now been using this medicine more and more for flu conditions, is to use lycopodium. Now, interestingly, the Banerjees use lycopodium as well for the flu, and they use it as a third line. They use it in a 30C. I believe that he said, Dr. Christopher, and I always like to refer to other homeopaths who have a lot more experience in a specific field, he, I believe, said use it in a 200. So as far as I'm concerned, you kind of have a choice there. Since the Banerjees say 30, I always, not always, but generally speaking, I use the protocol that they regard as valuable because they have such high numbers. So that would be used perhaps every 3 to 6 hours. You could use that along with, people always ask me, can I use influenzinum? Yes, you may use influenzinum, but make sure that you have influenzinum from this year. 2017, 2018 winter, because otherwise, it could be useful, but then again, it may not. We have some questions here, so let's see what we've got. Oh my gosh, you are absolutely right. Please excuse me. I've been saying gelsemium, and I mean bryonia, and the reason for that is because gelsemium is another one. So please, let me step back. That's why this is live. I might have edited this if it had not been. We're going to, let me just see the question again, Perry, to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. That yes, it is aconitum 200 with bryonia 30. Please excuse me. That is the protocol that we've been using time and again, and that is the one that I was telling you about with the Banerjees. Please excuse me if I can erase a little bit, I would do that. But bryonia is also, and that's why I confuse them. Bryonia is also very valuable for the flu as well, because it's, well, I don't know exactly why. I mean, I can give you all the reasons with the materia medica as to why it would act, but it's a very powerful remedy as well. So you want to, bryonia, gelsemium, both of them are very good, but aconitum is particularly good with gelsemium. Did I say that right? So please excuse me. Eupatorium is another good one for when the bones are extremely painful, and I believe I discussed that at my last blog. So bone pain can be rhus tox. It can also be eupatorium. I believe that eupatorium is for when the pain is really extreme, especially in the bones, deep bone pain, whereas rhus tox is more in the joints. All right. Yes, aconitum with bryonia. I've noticed a lot of people, someone's asking me, with a cold or the flu, are struggling with lingering coughs that are not responding to Ipecac. I am one of those people. All right. So Ipecac is a great cough remedy when it's hacking, when it's when somebody gags from the cough. Doesn't have to be every single cough, but it's a hacking cough or gagging. Now, if that doesn't act, then we also, then may I see that question again? Let me make sure that I'm covering it completely. That is when we use bryonia with aconitum. That can be also for a cough. You can also use chelidonium 30 for a cough that's not letting up. Now, here's one other possibility. A lot of times people have coughs in which it's a postnasal drip. and it's the sinuses are dripping, and that's what's causing the cough. So it depends on what kind of cough you're talking about. Is the cough here or is the cough here? If it's in the chest, we've already covered that. That's more the ipecac, etc. But if it's in the sinuses and it's draining and causing coughing in the throat, then it's important to remember that it could simply be sanguinaria. And because sanguinaria, and I was planning on actually talking about sanguinaria sometime in the future, because it's a great medicine for sinuses. And it's almost like a double T. So we go straight down the midline here, and one T across the sinuses, and then perhaps another T across the sinuses on the forehead. But if there's that drippage, these are the areas that it covers. If it drips and causes that postnasal drip that then makes someone cough and hack, then it's going to be sanguinaria often. That's sanguinaria 200, and I like to use that. I would not necessarily use that every 3 hours unless it was truly severe. When we might consider it severe is if someone is trying to sleep and they must sit up because the drainage is causing enough coughing that they can't even get a good night's sleep. Then I might consider using it every 3 hours and then go to every 6 hours as it improves. Okay, what is your response to other homeopaths? This is Shauna asking this, saying Banerjee protocols are horrible to use. I say, all right, other homeopaths, go for it. I'm actually going to do a podcast soon on exactly that subject because I was classical for many, many years. I studied classical homeopathy for close to 30 years, and I was in practice for approximately 15. I'm not counting so much anymore. And I was disappointed, as I'm sure my fellow homeopaths are often disappointed. And so if you watch for a podcast, it should be coming up in about a week or so, we're going to be talking about exactly that. What brought me to the Banerjees? And so it's easy to criticize as a backseat driver or Monday morning quarterback when you don't know what the Banerjees have done and are doing and the research that they have done. I always find it's interesting that that we're not being very scientific if we have a closed mind, and you must be open to looking at other possibilities. We must always be doing that in every aspect of our lives. And I put results way above dogma. And I think that's what's happening, is that people get stuck on dogma. And so, I mean, let them go their way. Unfortunately, they will probably come to this, perhaps not to the full degree of the Banerjees, but I bet they have their own protocols. I will bet. I bet they have protocols that they use pretty consistently based on organs, based on particular conditions. So I always say, you know, I don't know. I think people are not being as honest as they ought to be when they're classical homeopaths that have been around for a while. I think the older the homeopath, the more experienced, the more they realize that there really are specific protocols, whether they're for chronics, acutes, injuries, etc. And my favorite one, and then I'll go on to another subject, but my favorite one is a head injury. If your homeopath is taking a full case from a head injury, even if the head injury was a year ago, and they're making this into a classical constitutional case, shame on them. The first remedy they should be thinking about is cuprum or natrum sulfuricum, stramonium, cicuta verosa. Those are the remedies they should be thinking of immediately. And then you just flesh it out based on how the symptoms present. But if they're taking a full case over an old head injury, that means they're not using the protocols. And I don't believe they're not. I believe that they are using protocols. So let's see if we have any other questions here. All righty. I'm just seeing lots of names. Hi, Lori. Hi, Jennifer. Wow, I haven't seen Jennifer in a long time. That's nice to see you here. So I wanted to just reiterate that the sooner you catch this, the moment someone has a cold, Sometimes it's clear that it goes right into influenza by the way that it's presenting, because it's so severe. I mean, a cold is a mild thing, it's uncomfortable, but a person can carry on their duties with a cold. When it comes to the flu, there's no getting around it. That person really suffers. They're in bed, they're aching, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering. It feels as though they could become very, very ill, or that they are very, very ill. If it's just a cold, and I've said this before, I love borons, cold calm, C-A-L-M is the second word, cold calm. Excellent combination medicine. There are a lot of good combination medicines. I know your classical homeopath says no combinations, but remember, I'm teaching to a large number of people, and it's important that people know how to do this and not get discouraged, because classical is complicated and complex and difficult to master. So either we learn how to master something over a decade, or we learn how to use a remedy in a day. So let's see what some of these other questions are. All right. I read about the flu this season moving into pneumonia, and some of the symptoms being chills and blue lips. I'm getting frustrated that this is lingering in my husband, and tonight he's freezing. So I have a blog on pneumonia, and you might want to brush up on that. Just Google my name, Joette Calabrese, and pneumonia, and you'll see exactly the remedies. They're not the only ones. Those are the first ones that we often use, but there are others as well. But that certainly is a way to look at it. Now, that freezing business, that getting really, really cold, especially for men, it's not necessarily just men, but especially for men, I find that Nux vomica often takes care of that. Not just the cold, but we're using the cold, the freezing sensation, to utilize the best of the symptoms that are the most prominent. So in that case, I urge folks to use Nux vomica. Now, some people like using a 30. I like using Nux vomica 200. And then I would personally I've used it for my husband and my sons, and I've taken it myself, but it is, we see it more frequently valuable in men, especially men who are often in the head, accountants, attorneys, people who have a lot of responsibility, are working all the time, and then they just fall really hard when they get sick. So that's another one, and it doesn't mean you can't alternate a few of them. So you could use Nux vomica and perhaps aconitum. You could use Nux vomica if there's a lot of joint pains. You could use that with, for example, Rhus tox. But a lot of times, if you get the right remedy, the one that really hits at home, such as Nux vomica, you might find it takes care of absolutely everything. Now, if there's vomiting associated with it, then I like to use arsenicum album, and I use that in a low potency and a 6, for example. The Banerjees also use it. Let me see what they're using here. They use arsenicum album in they use it in a 3C. And I also like it in a 3C, but not everyone has a 3C available. It's not something that you would find readily at your grocery store. And remembering that what I'm trying to teach here is making this available to everyone. We don't want this to be esoteric. We don't want this to be only a specific segment of society. This is for everyone. And if we can find these remedies, and you can, at Walmart in the U.S., if you're watching me from the U.S., or Wegmans, and regular grocery stores, that's what we're looking for. That's what I want. Don't just chew it just because it's at Walmart. In fact, go over and look at all those medicines. Go for boron. I like Highlands. I like Washington, although you won't find those in grocery stores. But you will find boron and Highlands in the grocery store. So, and there are other homeopathic pharmacies coming up. But what I say time and again, speaking of the pharmacies, if you're in the U.S., please buy American. We need our pharmacies to be protected. And the best way to protect them is to give our money where our mouth is, and make sure that they are getting our dollars. Our dollars have power. So let's see if there are any other questions, Perry. How are we doing on this? Let's see. Oh, we've got a lot of questions now. Okay.
Not really.
Okay.
Last one, maybe.
All right. To the point, coughing to the point of gagging, you might want to listen to this again because we talked about Ipecac. And let's see. And this was, I've personally been told that they're, oh, this is back to the Banerjees. Yeah, they're really worthless. Yeah, you're right. or your homeopath is right. They're definitely worthless. So you have to make up your own decision about this. If this scares you, maybe you need to read more. If it scares you too much to even be bothered reading, then don't use it. Here's the thing. I don't force anybody to do this. I'm putting it out there. As having been a classical homeopath for a long, long time and being a very frustrated mother, when I first started, I was very frustrated with classical. Sometimes I'd hit it. Those of you know what I'm talking about because you've been doing it for a long time. Sometimes I didn't. And when you're a mother and you're raising a family and your parents get sick and your children get sick and your husband, you need answers. Really? Classical? I mean, that doesn't mean you don't go back to it. You start out with the easiest. Always go for the easiest. Pick from the lowest hanging fruit. It's just logical. If that doesn't act, if you don't see a response, then you can go to classical. But that's only if you've been trained to do classical. So I suspect that there are classicals out there that are worried about their practices and don't want mothers and others to go out and treat themselves. And I think that is, excuse me, despicable. There's far too many sick people on this earth. A good homeopath will be able to uphold a practice without being worried that their patients, their clients, will go elsewhere, because if the homeopath is good enough, the person always comes back again. Alrighty. If it's good for our bodies to fight illness on their own to build immunity, how do we discern when to treat a cold or flu with homeopathy? Well, a flu, I think, is worth treating. Don't you? I mean, like after having just spoken about the flu and how severe it can be dangerous, and it can take someone out of work for a long period of time. It can take mothers out of commission. They can't take care of their children. If 2 or 3 or 5 people in the family are all sick at the same time, that's pretty trying. A mild cold, by all means, just let it go or take cold calm. How do you discern? You have to make that decision. In my family, I found that it was when I didn't know what to do in the very beginning with my first son, for example. I used to just use essential oils. I used botanicals. Many of the botanicals I used were those that I found in the fields around my home out in the country. Often I would just hold him if he got sick until I could figure out the homeopathic medicine. And holding someone when they have a respiratory infection is a very important gesture. There's something to be said about touching someone and holding them. Let the dishes pile up. Don't worry about the laundry. Hire a teenage girl to come in and help. Whatever you need to do, but take care of your family and just hold if that's what you need to do. When you put the baby down or the child down who's been sick, get up and then make yourself and the family some good bone stock. Give the family kombucha. Or make your kombucha. I made it for years. I've made, I think, kombucha for 25 years. I just stopped making it because now it's just my husband and me, and we end up buying it. But we drink it, a little bit of it every day. So kombucha is a good thing to have on hand. Don't worry if the person is not hungry. There should be no appetite when someone is sick. But hydration, hydration, hydration. If the person becomes dehydrated, then there is absolutely a time to get to the hospital. An IV is a very important thing if someone is dehydrated. So what you want to do is make some oranges, juice some oranges, fresh oranges, or lemons, and put some honey in it. Put that into ice cube trays. Maybe add a little bit of water and make ice cubes with lemons and oranges. Chip them all up and have the person just suck on them, so that they're wetting their mouths and they're getting a little bit of fluid in. If someone has a high fever, especially for a child or a baby, you can coat their palms of their hands and the bottoms of their feet with olive oil. And what that does is it helps retain the moisture. There's a lot of perspiration that comes through the palms of the hands and the bottoms of the feet, and you can keep that person from dehydrating too quickly. If you see that there's, usually if there's dehydration, you lift up the skin on the back of the wrist, and if it sticks together, that person needs to be hydrated ASAP. If it's a baby, the fontanelles can sometimes sink in a little bit. That's dangerous. We don't ever want to get to that point. Or in here, there can be a sinking in of the at the temples. That's dehydration. Don't worry that if the person is vomiting, you go to arsenicum 30 or 3 and use that every few hours, or every, even in the very beginning, you can use that as often as every hour, every 30 minutes in the beginning until the person stops vomiting relentlessly. I know that many people say, well, I can't give my child something to drink because every time they drink, they vomit. That may very well be, but if you're starting to use arsenicum, you should see that slowing down. And even if it doesn't slow down, don't stop pushing the fluids just because of that. It is important that they get those fluids in, even if some of it comes up. Hopefully it's not all of it, and you might have gotten just a measure, an ounce even in there if possible. So I don't know if we have any other questions. Let's see if I've got any here. Do you have any there, Perry? Okay.
Last one.
All right, the last one. Last week you talked about mint as an antidote. I read today that Dr. Alyssa Song says to use peppermint oil and tea for children with fevers. And she mentions using homeopathy. Won't mint antidote? Well, it all depends. If you're talking about, I like Dr. Alyssa. I've actually done a seminar with her. And you can use mint if your child, number one, is being, the homeopathic is being repeated time and again. So you're using the mint and then you're using the remedy. And if the mint antidotes it, it's okay because you're going to be using the remedy again. And so that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is, depends on how much oil you're using. If you're talking about essential oil of mint and you sniff it, inhale it very, very deeply, that is likely to antidote most people. Not everyone, but most people. So that's another consideration. So there is sometimes a contradiction in using two different modalities, but try it out. I mean, if the child is not deathly sick, or which I imagine he or she is not if you're treating the child at home, then it's a good way to learn whether or not your child is particularly sensitive or not. You will find that the more you do this, just like riding a bike, the first time you tried, you couldn't do it, the second, the third, the 10th time. It wasn't until the 20th time that you really got on that bike and then was off down the sidewalk. So that is what you need to start thinking about. The more you treat, the more you will learn, and the faster you will feel confident, because remember, folks, this is all about fearless mothering and grandmothering. Now, for those of you who are not mothers, you know what I mean. I'm talking also about those who take care of pets and livestock and wildlife. Of course, you're not going to be dealing with the flu most likely, but certainly other conditions. So those women and men, but mostly women, who are using this, the more you treat, the more animals you have, the more family members you have, the bigger your family, the bigger your neighborhood, the more people, the better you will become at this. And you will get to the point where you will say, I'm not even afraid of illness anymore. And that is pretty much where what I've come to. I really don't fear getting sick. I don't like it if I get sick. I always get sick, as I've said before. I always get sick when I go to India, every single time. But I can handle it, but I don't like it because it's my husband's laughing because the two of us have gotten whooping cough and amoebic dysentery, and you name it, we've gotten it by going to India and my having worked in the clinic where there are a lot of infectious diseases. So I don't like it. It's horrible when it's happening because it's not a little mild cold and sniffles and snuffles. It's really slam and bam, and I'm on the bed or in the bed or on the floor in the bathroom. It's really awful. So I don't like it, but I know I can come out of it. And that has only come from my experience. day after day, week after week, month after month for close to 30 years of homeopathy and 38 years, including my studies in herbs and vitamins and supplements and diet. So you too will be able to get to that point, and you will grow from this on many, many levels. So I'll look at one more question, and then we'll probably call it a night. Where do you see that one? Last one. I've learned that a cold or flu can be followed by temporary torticollis, also known as wry neck. That's right. Have you come across that? You bet I have, and that would be rhus tox. And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. Torticollis is usually rhus tox, perhaps with symphytum. Those two can be used. Whether it's from a cold, whether it's from an automobile accident, whether it's from sleeping incorrectly on the bed, whether it's from cold air blowing on you in a plane and sleeping with your head cocked, and you get torticollis, because those are the common ways that can happen. Whether it's from skiing, whether it's from an injury. If you have torticollis, what's the remedy? Rhus tox and symphytum. Now, if the pain is extreme, then we look at hypericum. It doesn't mean it's the only one, but it's the first one 80% of the time, perhaps even more than that, maybe even 80% of the time. Those are the medicines that will help with torticollis. It doesn't mean it can't be ledum. It doesn't mean it can't be ruta. It doesn't mean it can't be arnica. Of course it can be those, but we always start with the easy, the low-hanging fruit, folks. That's where we're going to go always first. So with that, I want to empower all of you and lead you to a world of freedom from anxiety and worry. And God bless all of you, and I will see you next Monday. Bye now.